Okay, so what if everything you learned in science class wasn't a hard fact, but more like a belief? That's the pretty wild idea we're going to dive into today. And we're doing it through the eyes of a science teacher, a guy who started to question the very thing he taught for a living.
This is where it all starts, with this one big statement. Science is a belief system, nothing more. Wow, that's a bold claim, right? It's meant to make you stop and think about what truth even is. So you gotta wonder, how does a science guy end up thinking like this?
It really all started with this doubt, a private struggle. Just imagine for a second. You're a teacher, you're up there explaining science every single day, but in the back of your mind there's this little voice going, but is this really true? That's the conflict that kicked off this whole journey, making him rethink literally everything.
All right, so that brings us to the first part of his whole argument. He basically starts taking apart the building blocks of science. All those basic things we just accept as true without even thinking about it. And he kicks it off with a question that sounds super simple, almost like something a kid would ask. Why is an electron's charge negative? Who decided that? Science is great at telling us what it does. We can measure it, use it in formulas, but it can't tell you why it's negative in the first place, or where that charge even came from.
And he does the exact same thing with gravity. We all learn that two masses pull on each other, right? And the whole explanation we get is about space-time curving and all that. But, yeah, he's not buying that either.
And this really gets to the heart of what he's saying. From his point of view, sure, we've got evidence that points to a space-time curve, like how light bends around massive objects. But has anyone ever actually seen it? Nope. So for him, it's not proof. It's just a useful story we've all agreed to believe.
So this leads him to redefine a really important word in science, fundamental. You know how we talk about fundamental forces? Well, what does that word even mean? He argues it's just a fancy label we slap on things we have zero explanation for. It's basically a scientific way of saying, we don't know.
And that's the big punchline of his first point. If the very foundation of science is made up of these fundamental ideas that we just have to accept without any real proof, like why an electron is negative, then how is that any different from a belief system? It's faith, just in a different package.
Okay, so now that he's laid out his case for science being a belief system, he takes it a step further. He starts talking about the things that science just can't do, the questions he's pretty sure it will never be able to answer. He draws this really clear line between something that's real and something that's just a simulation. Think about it. Science can give you laughing gas to make you laugh, or tear gas to make you cry. But is that real happiness? Real sadness? He says no way. That's just a chemical reaction. It's not the same as that genuine feeling of joy or sorrow that comes from deep inside your soul. And he feels the same way about all the hype around AI. He just completely shoots down this idea that science is going to create a conscious being someday. He says they can have all the time in the world, a blank check of time as he puts it, but they'll never ever be able to create that spark of a real feeling.
So this deep skepticism doesn't just apply to the future. It also makes him totally reject science's story about our past. And he comes up with a completely different version of human history, a really different one.
Yeah, a huge part of this new story is that he completely throws out the theory of evolution. He just can't accept the idea that we came from monkeys. In his own words, he calls it a very dirty theory.
So, if not evolution, then what? Well, his idea is that history isn't a straight line, it's a circle. He believes that humanity has, over and over again, reached these incredible technological peaks, way more advanced than we are now. But then they'd realize that all this external knowledge is just a dead end. And every single time, that civilization would get destroyed, and the whole 12,500-year cycle just starts all over again.
So you're probably asking, what's his proof for this? Well, he points to things we can still see today. Ancient artifacts, incredible buildings, stuff that he says is so advanced our best engineers today couldn't even build it if you gave them 100 years. To him, this is the leftover proof of those forgotten, super advanced civilizations.
So, if he's right, and following science and technology is just a road to ruin, then where do we find real truth? His answer is simple. You have to stop looking out there and start looking in here.
This little chart here really nails the change in perspective he's talking about. Science is all about the external stuff, right? It tells you this is an atom, this is soil, that is the sky. But he argues that's missing the entire point. The real questions, the important ones, are the internal ones. Who are you? Who am I? Where did we come from?
And for him, this wasn't just some theory. It was a real, personal experience. He talks about this huge turning point in his life when he started studying ancient texts, specifically the Mandukya Upanishad, which is all about consciousness. He says that after he did that, his mind was completely changed.
And this change was dramatic. It led him to a pretty shocking conclusion. He basically says that everything we learn in science is, and I'm quoting here, total false, fake things. He thinks it's no use even reading it because it's all just a distraction from finding what's really true.
So why would he say something that strong? Why call it all fake? Well, his logic is that our senses, what we see, what we hear, they're just not sharp enough to perceive what's really real. And if science is built on observing the world with these flawed, blunt senses, then the whole thing must be built on a foundation that's just wrong.
So at the end of the day, he's basically laying out two paths, two choices for us. On one hand, you have the path of science, which he says is just another kind of blind faith that's all about the outside world. And on the other hand, you have the path of ancient scriptures, which he believes is where the real hidden truths are, the ones that make you look inside yourself.
And that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. If all knowledge, at its core, requires some kind of belief, then what should you believe in? If his argument is right, and even science is built on these unprovable fundamentals, then the real choice isn't if you're going to have faith, but what or who you're going to put that faith in.